following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Tonight, what are the odds? State lawmakers consider a casino in Chicago and expanding gaming statewide. Why Mayor Emanuel is betting on it.
Plus, the Wild West right here in Cook County. That's the fear of Sheriff Tom Dart as Springfield faces a high noon deadline. Why the sheriff wants the power to say who can carry a concealed weapon.
And another showdown at the State House. Dueling pension reform bills, but no imminent solution to the state's fiscal crisis. And the clock is ticking.
Plus, most of us avoid dark alleys, but one Chicago photographer seeks them out, how he transforms urban wasteland into works of art. These stories and more tonight on In the Loop.
Good evening, I'm Barbara Pinto.
And I'm Chris Bury. Tonight we take a closer look at gambling in Illinois.
Mayor Emanuel is doubling down on a casino for Chicago, saying it's needed to help rebuild Chicago's crumbling schools.
But Illinois' well-deserved reputation for corruption raises some big concerns. Who exactly will control a Chicago casino, and where will all that tax money really go? Americans love to gamble. It adds up to big money. Casinos raked in more than $37 billion last year. The industry trade group says state and local governments took a big cut too, $8.5 billion in taxes. Illinois already has 9 riverboat casinos, but a new plan okayed by the state Senate would greatly expand gambling in Illinois. If it becomes law, Chicago would get its very first casino. Mayor Rahm Emanuel is all for that. Soon after he took office, the mayor set his sights on the tax money Chicagoans now fork over to other states.
We have gambling in Chicago. It just happens to be in Hammond, Indiana. We lose $20 million around a month to Hammond, Indiana revenue.
In a slick new video produced by his office, Mayor Emanuel urges state legislators to approve more gambling. His pitch to taxpayers, 100% of revenue from a Chicago casino will fund Chicago schools.
Let's imagine it's true. How do we know it's going to be true? Like, you know, part of the problem we talked about this at the beginning is a transparency issue. Like, we can't follow that. It's a statement without any public accountability.
Ray Lopez Calderon is executive director of Common Cause Illinois. The grassroots lobby has kept a close eye on efforts to expand gambling here. Now its director is concerned that the gambling measure is turning into a feud between Mayor Emanuel and Governor Quinn.
It's about whose board controls the casinos. And so there's really no proper attention to the lobbying laws that would enable gambling and the gambling expansion to improperly influence our legislature even more than it already does.
Common Cause estimates the gaming industry has spent more than $30 million lobbying in Springfield over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, supporters of expanded gambling argue that a casino for Chicago would give the city a new dose of excitement, attracting tourists and their tax money.
So once we put our stake in the ground and state that we're going to have a Chicago casino in the 3rd largest city in America, probably the last bastion of a great city that's going to have a casino, I think they're going to come clamoring to Chicago.
Jerry Roper heads the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. He estimates a Chicago casino could generate $300 million to $900 million a year in taxes for the city and state, and add $1 billion a year to the city's economy. Critics worry that kind of money will invite corruption. Roper believes such fears are overblown.
The Illinois legislature has some oversight. The gaming board has oversight. The mayor has gone along with that. So I believe all of the measures to stop anything that would, be viewed as corruption are there.
Governor Quinn has twice vetoed gambling measures, saying Illinois should not become the Las Vegas of the Midwest. But a spokesperson for Quinn tells us the new plan is moving in the right direction. In addition to Chicago, suburban Cook and Lake counties, Rockford and Danville could get casinos. Slot machines would be allowed at O'Hare, Midway, and local racetracks. But will that cold cash even begin to fix Illinois' critical financial problems?
I don't know of anybody that state was saved by building a few casinos.
It's a very, very small part of the overall big issue that we're wrestling with in this state, the pension reform, the fact that we owe $8 billion to small businesses around the state. But we need to start somewhere, and this is a great beginning.
A smart gamble for Illinois or a bad bet? Joining us today to discuss the future of gambling in Illinois is Andy Shaw, President and CEO of the Better Government Association, and welcome. You heard from the Chamber of Commerce there that they think this would be a great beginning to help solve some of Illinois' financial problems. Agree with that?
Well, from a personal standpoint, I don't like the idea of trying to balance budgets on the back of gamblers. On the other hand, a lot of money, as the mayor said, is flowing out of state. A lot of Chicagoans drive to Indiana to gamble, in Hammond, and they go all the way up to Michigan. And we also are the convention center of America, along with Las Vegas and Orlando. The trade shows, the conventions, the business meetings bring millions of people into the city with discretionary dollars to spend. And a good case can be made that some of those discretionary dollars would go to gaming as a diversion,
so
and that would be good.
The Better Government Association is not opposed to the idea of casinos in Chicago or Illinois.
No, what we're opposed to is a rush to judgment. The most important thing is to do this slowly, deliberately, come up with a really good cost-benefit analysis, make sure the gaming board is empowered to keep the mob and other corrupt elements out, and then make sure the location of it is appropriate. Do this in a way that doesn't in any way, shape, or form resemble the parking meter deal. That is the template for bad government. And so if we do everything exactly the opposite of the way they did the parking meter deal, I think we have a chance of a new asset to Chicago. Personally, I don't like gambling, but from a public policy standpoint, it is very defensible.
Mayor Emanuel has made it clear, and in fact, he started a new campaign basically to say that 100% of the tax money that Chicago would get would go toward Chicago public schools. Does that give you some comfort?
Right. That is a very strong and strategic argument that I think makes a lot of sense. It makes it much more saleable. Public education is the single most important service in the city of Chicago. You know the public schools have been struggling badly. They're going through the trauma now of the school closing argument. To say that several $100 million a year potentially could go to public education, I think is a very reassuring thing. Now, I know my friend at Common Cause suggested that you have to prove that this is going to happen. That's true. You can't simply take the mayor's word for it.
Well, the question is, can it change down the road? Can another mayor or another city council decide, no, we want to divert the revenue somewhere else?
That can always happen, Chris, but if you have a good, strong, enabling ordinance, which is the same sort of thing we need for future privatization, an enabling ordinance that calls for public hearings, cost-benefit analysis, due deliberation, and you say specifically that that's where the dollars are going, it certainly is operational under this mayor. Anything can change with changes in administrations, but I think at least that's the right place to start.
There is very understandable concern about corruption here in Northern Illinois. We lead most other jurisdictions in terms of federal corruption convictions. How worried are you about keeping gambling clean, especially in Chicago?
Ironically, I'm more comfortable with keeping gaming clean than I am about keeping the rest of government clean. You know, if you look at the history of gambling in Illinois under this current gaming board, there has been almost no mob influence since they killed the Rosemont deal, which was mobbed up 15 years ago. All these casinos have operated in Illinois with very little corruption. The gaming board has done a terrific job. The current bill under consideration in Springfield calls for several million new dollars for the gaming board to hire more investigators and more vetters of these licensed applicants. And so if the formula they've used up to now continues, The key here is to increase the size of the gaming board's investigative arm proportionate to the increase in gaming. You know, this overall bill will make us the Las Vegas of the Midwest. I don't care if Governor Quinn dislikes the term. We are basically doubling the number of gaming positions if we pass the whole gaming bill.
You say it's been clean, but even the BGA has found some at least disturbing occurrences, including a casino in Joliet giving VIP cards to elected officials, which gave them access that the public didn't have.
Right. So that's government corruption. That isn't necessarily casino corruption. And I will say, in defense of casinos nowadays, they are publicly held multinational companies. They're no longer the mobbed up companies that Bugsy Siegel and his friends founded in Las Vegas all those years ago. The gaming interest is just like any other multinational now. They're mostly publicly held. They're regulated by the SEC and other bodies. And with gaming boards in place, I'm not that concerned. Do they try to curry favor? But the currying of favor in Joliet was more about the comings and goings of people, you know, maybe if a person gets in there that's underage. That kind of stuff is government corruption. That's not mob corruption that is actually siphoning off the dollars. So that's the real fear. Mayor Emanuel, I think, has the right intentions, but he has to be regulated by the gaming board.
In your previous life, you were a political reporter for a long time. Now you see that Governor Quinn is clearly changing his tune on this. What do you suppose has made the governor basically come around on casinos?
Well, I think a couple things. I think he understands that there is grudging public support for at least a Chicago casino to level the playing field with Indiana and the other states. He has to get along with the lawmakers, and he has been the thorn in their side on this issue on a couple of occasions. But most importantly, I think that the new iteration of the gaming bill is somewhat better than the previous versions, which lacked enough ethical oversight. Now, Aaron Jaffe, the head of the gaming board, still says the current bill is lacking in enough ethical oversight and in other components. He thinks that some of the ethics that were added to the bill are more window dressing than real. I tend to trust Jaffe, so I would say that there's still a chance Quinn will veto this version. If he does, however, I think he's easily overridden in both chambers with those Democratic majorities. Many of those people are very much in favor of seeing Rahm Emanuel get his casino.
So on that note, very quickly, put on your handicapper's hat here. What are the odds that Chicago is going to get a casino?
I would say that they're 3-1 right now, even though I'm not a betting man. I think
in favor.
I think the bill's going to pass. The governor's eventually going to sign on, and Chicago's going to get its casino. And if I were taking one final bet, I would say a good spot for it might be the old post office over I-90, because that's a great, large piece of unused land, which is not going to be too close to other things to contaminate them, as it were. And I think it'd be a good use, easily accessible to transportation. And I think the developer of that piece would like to see that happen, and I could see it happening.
All right, Andy Shaw, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris.
Appreciate it. Another thorny topic on our agenda tonight. Are we any closer to a fix for the pension crisis that has made such a mess of Illinois' finances? Here's Barbara with more on that.
Nearly $100 billion, that's now the staggering pension debt Illinois carries, the worst in the country. Two pension reform bills are setting up a potential showdown in Springfield as lawmakers grapple to pass meaningful legislation before the session ends later this month. Joining me to talk about this and other trending stories right now, Steve Cochran, talk show host for 560 WYND, Michelle Damico, a PR consultant, and Mary Frances Bragiel, reporter and anchor for WLS-AM 890. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
And we have two pension reform bills now working their way through the legislature, competing measures. One from Senate President John Cullerton, a very union-friendly plan expected to save about $11 billion a year. The other, a less union-friendly plan from House Speaker Mike Madigan, expected to save about $30 million a year. Now, when you look at these two plans, do they both have a shot, or is this an attempt legislatively to play good cop, bad cop with the unions? Mary Frances, we'll start with you.
I think at this point, both believe that they have a shot. We've seen this kind of play out before. At the end of the day, I would bet that Mike Madigan probably has a better shot because of all of his resources behind him, the people behind him on this, and especially in the future, long-term future, in getting this through. But we'll have to see.
I think that we have a challenge here because of the constitutional question, and I think even though Mike Madigan has the power in Springfield to get things done, he's got the Supreme Court going up against him when this issue does go to the Supreme Court. I think, and my prediction is that eventually Cullerton's plan will prevail because it is more union friendly. It gives the unions more choices. The only challenge I have with it is that it doesn't do enough quickly enough. From what I've heard, it will take at least 5 years for us to get down to a $50 billion underfunded pension program. And that doesn't do enough for me as a taxpayer to say, oh, I feel good about it. But it's a better start, I think. I think his logic that says, what's better, getting $50 billion down in 5 years or nothing based on the Madigan plan?
Now, Steve, many people have said this plan is the Cullerton plan is simply not enough. And also the retired teachers union said it's not that union friendly. We're planning to sue if this goes through. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's the constitutional piece of this. But I think anytime you have the unions go, sure, I think you got to be a little bit skeptical. The unions jumped on this a little too quickly. It's a little too union friendly. The fact of the matter is nobody's whole anymore since 2007 and 2008. We've dug this hole forever. I find myself in an odd position complimenting Mike Madigan, because I don't do that a whole lot. But the Madigan plan is much more aggressive, and frankly, it's much more realistic. It's not an easy pill to swallow, but the unions are really doing the rank and file a disservice here, because the unions have to say, this is how much money the state has now. This is how much money the state will have a year down the road or 2 years down the road. The unions need to make the best deal they can now, and that's why they got really excited about the Cullerton plan. Everything out of Springfield is a headline until it's something. So it's very easy for Cullerton, I like Cullerton, it's very easy for Cullerton to say, here's my plan, and Madigan to say, here's my plan. Well, the House and the Senate aren't talking to each other about either plan. So until there's action, there's no action. So it's a little bit of a headline grab, and I don't think the Cullerton thing moves fast enough, as you mentioned.
Yeah, we have 3 weeks here. How do you see this playing out, Mary Frances?
I see a lot of, as Steve was talking about, I see there's a lot of headlines, a lot of press about this. I don't know how much they'll talk about the behind-the-scenes action and where they're culminating together to try and make this work. But you're going to see a showdown between the two of them, because that's how the press is going to go ahead and lay it out there, as a showdown until the very end.
Histrionics. Maybe we'll get some union rallies in Springfield. We're going to meet up against this end of May deadline that always comes when lawmakers want to get out of Springfield and go back to their districts. I see a lot of rushing to get something done, and then a lot of questions about whether or not it's going to court. Who's going to sue first?
It's $100 billion. I mean, the math doesn't lie. If people get paid by Illinois in 120 days, they're thrilled. It's usually 6 months or longer. You got to stop the bleeding. So they need to do something, and they need to do it quickly. I'll be the first to congratulate them if they get something done by deadline.
Now, in this economy with so many companies retooling and rethinking pensions, you have some state workers who are able to retire at age 55 with about 75 to 80% of their base salary and a guaranteed 3% cost of interest raise every single year. Now, they are state taxpayers as well, but is it fair that the rest of the state taxpayers who don't have that kind of a retirement plan will be left to pick up the slack on some level?
I feel that union employees who signed contracts and signed agreements and agreed as part of their own employment plan that they would forego pay increases in exchange for contributions to their pension plans, contributions that never happened, I don't think it's unfair to allow them a cost of living increase as part of their pension. They don't get Social Security. I don't think it's unfair to expect their employers to live up to the contracts that they signed so many years ago. This has been a problem the legislature created. It was a problem the legislature agreed to their contracts. Now the legislature's reneging on those contracts.
Yeah, the real world is you gotta pay. So yes, they don't have the traditional benefits the rest of us have, but there needs to be actual courage in Springfield. And if you can find some, call me.
Yeah.
And courage in Springfield to step up and say, here's the balance for the rest of the state, here's the public union model. It's not going to be perfect, but let's get closer.
Another measure brewing there. We'll move on to concealed carry. The state has until June 9th, the deadline to come up with a concealed carry measure for Illinois after an appeals court ruled that the statewide ban was unconstitutional. Now, Sheriff Tom Dart, a former lawmaker, says he's not so sure his former colleagues can do this in the time allotted, so he would like to prevent Cook County from becoming what he calls the Wild West. His proposal, gun owners who want to conceal and carry should pay a $300 fee, and the sheriff will decide on whether people need to have concealed carry of firearms based on need. Steve, is this a good idea?
The $300 fee won't last. I mean, it'll be court challenged and thrown out almost immediately. And look, I believe in the Second Amendment. I also believe that people who have overtly supported it since Newtown have really blown up their own argument in a really bad way. You can't have, everything's about precedent. You can't have a separate law for Cook County and a separate law for the rest of the state. If you're going to have concealed carry, you have to find a way to match it downstate in a rural area to what's going on in Chicago. That's going to be the biggest hurdle.
I pity the guy who's going to make the decision, okay, you can have a gun, you can conceal carry, you cannot.
Yeah.
I think it sounds like a nightmare. I am not in favor of allowing people to walk around the city of Chicago or Cook County carrying guns. I looked at some research at the Violence Policy Center, and since 2007, they've started tracking violent crimes as a result of concealed carry. 14 law enforcement officers shot to death from concealed carriers, 494 private citizens killed, 23 mass shootings occurred. I think concealed carry in Cook County and in Illinois is such a horrible thing that's going to come to this state. I don't like it. I don't trust people to be walking around downtown with a weapon in their pocket or on the CTA with me. No way.
I think it's one of those issues that, once again, is they're going to do all they can, make it a headline issue. You're going to see Tom Dart out there in front of any reporter they can in order to get this where he wants it, and stuff. And so I agree with them. We'll have to see what happens.
And you have to have something done within a period of time, or there's a constitutional carry provision that kicks in.
That's right.
And then it is the wild, wild west.
Sure.
So they actually have to get off the dime on this.
But if Cook County does something separately, I mean, it could be difficult in places like Barrington and Elgin, where parts of the town are in Cook County. So you could be a law-abiding citizen on one side of the street and a felon on the other side of the street. Let's move on now to schools. This week, hearing officers opposed 10 of the 54 proposed school closings in the city of Chicago, and they have some reservations about others for reasons that include student safety, resources for children with disabilities, and either whether some of the receiving schools are a better deal for children and academically better than the schools they're leaving. What do you make of this, and what does it say about the process that CPS has gone through?
I thought this was interesting when I read this. I thought it was interesting that Rahm, the Mayor Emanuel, is coming back now and saying this is not their job to, basically tell us exactly if this is working or not, quite frankly. They're supposed to just look, at my understanding is just kind of look at what was laid out there. And so he's not happy, of course, because he's not getting what he wants. So he's not getting what he wants to hear at this point. But you know what? They bring up some valid points. They bring up the points that a lot of these parents have. And a lot of the public is now gathering once they read more and more about this, these school closing, what exactly it means for safety for children.
But the judges' opinions are non-binding. Right. Do you think they'll hold any weight, Steve?
Well, yes, they'll hold weight because they're already out in the public and the public has sway. The problem here is, if you can't stop down for a while and consider, even if you have to open these schools for the fall semester, you need a little extra time to get through this, especially in the case of special needs kids, because there are additional considerations there. But again, Karen Lewis has been completely disingenuous about this. She was not surprised that schools would be closed. She may not have known the exact schools, but she needs to play it straight with her union members as well, which she's not doing. And it goes back to the strike last fall. It was all about Rahm and Karen Lewis. It was very little about the kids, and I think that we're paying the price for that now.
And I think one thing that we're failing to consider here is that, in my opinion, I think Barbara Byrd Bennett is a courageous person for taking on this problem. It is a problem that has been in the works nationwide for the past several years. Many other school districts in big cities have closed schools. She's facing this right now. Maybe, perhaps, there was a PR problem that she created by not being more forthcoming with the data that proves that these kids are going to go to a better school. Maybe she didn't bring in the community and say to them, here is what is in store for your child in terms of improvements to the next school that they're going to get.
The question is getting them there, right? It's a better school,
right.
But how do you get them there safely?
Right.
But that's also information that how much is she able to, she may be, CPS CEO, but how much is she able to put out there without Rahm, without keeping her job secure?
And you raise a very good point about the amount of information that anybody in government feels free to share with their constituencies.
A good point. We'll have to leave it at that right now. We're out of time. With Steve Cochran, Michelle Damico, Frances Bragiel, we thank you so much for joining us and for your opinions today. While most of us are asleep, Xavier Nuez is roaming dark alleys and abandoned buildings. It's how he makes a living as a photographer. When you see his work, you will never see a dark alley the same way again.
The places that I choose are literally shunned. I mean, people do not want to go anywhere near them. The fact they are so out of the mainstream and the fact that they are so hated and feared is a big attraction to me.
Photographer Xavier Nuez makes his living lurking in the dark, focusing on the depths of urban decay. Since 1991, he's been capturing images of desolation and abandonment, part of a series he calls Alleys and Ruins. Where most would bring police protection, Nuez brings only a 50-year-old camera, some lights, a handful of colored gels, and a lot of courage.
So I've been shooting this series for 22 years. And in that time, I've been privileged to be able to travel the country. In those years, I've been chased by gangs a number of times, and I've had guns pointed at me. The cops sometimes will threaten to put me in jail.
But danger and threats don't stop him. Nuez says this is in his blood and his family history. A childhood fear he's turned into a career.
My father spent time on the street. He was homeless as a teenager, and I grew up listening to some of his stories. For me, the great irony of my images is that they were created because of this deep-seated fear that I would end up homeless, and this thing that I thought would drag me down and ruin my life, in fact, has done the opposite. The thing I was most afraid of has, in fact, created the greatest successes in my life.
So successful, in fact, that the New York Times has called his Alleys and Ruins series a masterpiece. He's captured images in cities across the country, from New York to Dallas, Compton, California, to Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. Photos that leave you wondering, how did he do that?
So what I'll do is I'll put the camera on a tripod, do 10 to 30-minute exposures. During that time, I'm shining colored lights on different parts of the scene, and I combine my lighting with the city lights through these, very long exposures.
That's my 50-year-old Hasselblad film camera. It's been with me for 20 years. Bought it secondhand, and it's just, incredible quality. It's a work of art in itself.
Well, I'm going to be lighting the scene with various lights. This spotlight from this distance, for it to register properly, I've got to be moving it at a certain rate.
Yeah, this looks good. This looks good. If I get a good Polaroid, it's rare. So this is exciting.
Like all the images in the series, it's going to look like a theatrical set. It'll be the fantasy version of this place. I think I've got a winner here.
Xavier Nuez's series Alleys and Ruins is currently on exhibit at Chicago's Instituto Cervantes through July 8th. Now, before we close, I want to congratulate my colleague Chris Bury for a job well done at the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation Awards for Investigative Reporting.
Well, thank you, Barbara. This is a really important event. It honors investigative reporters who do the really hard work of keeping a watchdog on our government. At the end of the day, they tell us who to trust, who not to trust, and why. It's vital work to our democracy, and it was great to recognize some really terrific reporters.
Vital work to journalism, too.
Absolutely.
That is all for tonight's show. You are now in the loop.
The conversation continues right now on WYCC.org. Until next week, I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. Good night.